Hi, friends, and welcome to the Story Forge podcast. I'm your host, Lyle Smith, and just to remind you all, the objective of this show is to talk to a variety of people from a wider variety of backgrounds about what they do, what their careers are, sometimes how they started their businesses, and how they are responding to the challenges that are facing them to succeed in normal and beyond normal circumstances. Today's conversation was a wonderful opportunity for me. How many of you out there, when you were a child or a youngster, remember when some adult in your life asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up? Now, how many of you answered at least once, I want to be an astronaut? How many of you actually meant it? Greg Johnson remembers watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon when he was 7 years old. And that was when he decided that was the path he wanted to follow for himself. He became, among other things, an aeronautical engineer, a U.S. Air Force pilot, fighter pilot, combat pilot, instructor in any number of cool aircraft, and eventually pilot of 2 missions of the Space Shuttle Endeavor, including the second-to-last mission of the Space Shuttle program in 2011. Since then, he's gone on to numerous fascinating jobs, including running CASES, the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space, that managed and ran the U.S. National Laboratory aboard the International Space Station. And of late, he's gotten into numerous entrepreneurial efforts, exploring private business opportunities in space and STEM education. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. He's done some amazing things, had some amazing adventures, made some amazing friends, and was gracious enough to talk to me here about what he's doing now. He's the first guest I've had who has a Wikipedia page, mostly correct information too, and he's using all of his astounding experience to make the world a better place. From Space Nation, the world's first space travel company, to Newton's Road, a not-for-profit in Michigan focused on expanding educational opportunities in science and technology fields. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did.
So where are you now?
I'm in Houston, Texas, in the house that I moved into 22 years ago when I first joined the astronaut corps. And specifically, I'm in the music room, which is now a converted, video studio for the quarantine and lockdowns.
Oh, very good.
And so, but I have a piano here. I come from a family of musicians. I've taken down most of the family musical photos and replaced them with some of my space stuff.
Right.
But this is where I do all my recordings, and I've got a Beach Brothers guitar signed by Brian Wilson.
Oh, that's cool.
Trumpets and other things. So we're a really musical family, and this studio has kind of become, or this music room has kind of become my studio.
Very good. So are you a musician yourself?
I play a little trumpet and play some keys. I did find a keyboard up on the space station, my second flight, and we had the first, I believe, on-orbit rock band with a flute, a guitar, and a keyboard.
I love that.
It was fun.
Yeah. So we'll get to that. But I was joking earlier. You're my first guest to have his own Wikipedia page. So I found a whole bunch of information that I didn't know about before. So if I have any of this wrong, we can blame Wikipedia.
Well, so the way Wikipedia works is other people create those pages. That page has created itself. I've had no inputs to it whatsoever. I think some people do interface with Wiki, but I don't. I just look at it and, I look at the sources. They look halfway credible. I go, okay, I'm not going to lie about that story. Okay, that's true. No.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, didn't seem anything that would strike me as embarrassing on there. So I think
how you get call signs. Somebody put something in about that, and it's true, so I can't deny it.
Okay. Oh, that's the name Box.
Yeah, it came from Cardboard Desert Storm. That's a true story. Much to my chagrin, I would love to be Iceman or Maverick or have a cool call sign like that, but I ended up with Box. I tried to shed it about 3 times, and finally it just stuck.
It just Yeah, I said that to somebody. I had a guy I worked with at one point who he was a CEO or a self-styled CEO, and he liked to use the word visionary when describing himself. And I used to say, Jeff, man, you don't get to call yourself a visionary. That's other people
That's right.
call you that.
That's exactly right.
And nicknames are kind of the same way. I guess call signs are kind of the same way. So, it says you were born in England, which I didn't know. Is that true?
Yeah, my father was a military musician. He ran the USAFE band for a number of years, twice actually. When I was a kid, between 7 and 13 years old, we lived in Germany. But he was also a band leader in the UK around the time my brother and I were born. So I was overseas to military parents. So I'm a military brat, but a U.S. citizen. So.
Fantastic. That's and I was wondering about that too, because there were multiple citations of like high school in Ohio and different places you've lived, which of course leads me to an assumption that you were, throw the term around, military brat growing up. Is that about right?
That's true. And so Dad got his sunset tour at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And so I was there from 8th grade through graduation. And then I went off to the academy. And he retired just a couple of years later. Then he retired up in Michigan at the lake house. So
very good. And he was Air Force, and you went right into the Air Force, or the academy anyway.
That's right. That's true. Air Force Academy. So yeah. I was actually working for the Air Force in college at the academy.
Fantastic. So was your dad the connection? Was that because you make a choice into what branch of service you might go into when you do that?
Well, my dad probably was the single biggest influence on me during my upbringing. Mm-hmm. My dad and mom. So I was always hanging around military, Air Force bases,
right,
and seeing airplanes. And so I was exposed to aviation. Dad took me up in a couple airplanes of his buddies, so I did get exposure to flying. Mm-hmm. I really, though, was a pretty geeky student. I wanted to be an engineer, and then fly to be a better aeronautical engineer, as it turns out.
Wow.
But then when I started flying, I realized how much I loved that. So that, long story short, I ended up being more of a professional pilot than an engineer.
Yeah, I don't think you get into flying fighter aircraft without having a love of being off the ground, right?
Absolutely. And I love all forms of flying. I loved being an instructor pilot. Mm-hmm. Right after I got my wings, they retained me as an instructor in Lubbock, Texas. Mm-hmm. But flying a fighter was great, very high-tech, state-of-the-art airplane, the F-15E. Mm-hmm. And then that was the attraction of test pilot school. One of them was that I wanted to test new airplanes and new technologies. And it was also one of the feeders into the astronaut corps, which was a long shot.
Right.
But I loved being a test pilot, and then it all worked out for me to end up with NASA.
Right. And the test pilot has got to be a little bit of a this is me assuming. This is the guy speaking who doesn't like to go on roller coasters that go upside down. So, but as a test pilot, it's got to make at least some kind of connection with engineering too, because engineers are always building something new, trying something new, testing something new, and it's that connection between the two. It seems like a close marriage to me.
Well, yes, absolutely. A test pilot is an engineering pilot. Mm-hmm. When we go through test pilot school, we get a lot of engineering, rebluing. And it's a different kind of engineering position, but it is a merge of flying and also engineering and design. So,
right.
So it was really exciting for me. It was perfect, and I was lucky to test some really fun airplanes when I was out at Edwards for 4 years.
Right.
We had some engine tests where you're doing the entire envelope of the. You're flying the entire envelope of the fighters, and we were testing GE 129 engines in F-15s, and these are 30,000 pound thrust engines on an airframe that weighs about 30,000 pounds. So thrust to weight ratio of 2 to 1. I mean, and we go from the slowest you can fly all the way to 800 knots calibrated on the ground. That's supersonic. We did those tests over the Pacific Ocean, and then also up to Mach 2.5 up in. In the stratosphere. So it's absolutely amazing test. And then we also did some other interesting tests. We did an F-15 spin test, mm-hmm. and we also tested a thrust vectoring technology that's currently on the F-35, or it started off as a technology that grew into these thrust vectoring engines you see on the F-35. So a lot of meaningful flight tests during those 4 years at Edwards.
Fantastic. And it's funny because when you hear test pilot, at least, from my chair, which again we've already established is a very ground-based chair, you think, the right stuff. You think, test pilot, you think Chuck Yeager and all that kind of stuff. And I know we talked about this once a while ago, that Chuck Yeager.
Yes, Chuck was, he opened the air show at Edwards Air Force Base every year with a sonic boom.
Oh, wow.
When I was at North Carolina after Desert Storm, I somehow got caught up in the air show circuit. So when I went to Edwards and was assigned for 4 years, I had that air show stink on me, if you will. Who's done an air show? Hide under the table. But I got involved with the air shows out at Edwards, and it was a very different breed of air shows. And getting to know Chuck Yeager through that process was fun. I remember the final year I was at Edwards, I actually was in charge of the air show itself. And I needed to find an instructor pilot in the F-15 to fly with Chuck Yeager.
Right.
And so I was shaving that morning, looking in the mirror going, wow, I'm an instructor pilot in the F-15. I think I'll see it for myself, And so I called him up on the phone. He came out on Columbus Day, and we took a couple rides in the F-15. He showed me that he could make a sonic boom hit the ground within seconds.
Wow.
With no instrumentation, no internal navigation system, no GPS, just seat of the pants. He could fly at 30,000 feet, go Mach 1.6, and the sonic boom would hit the ground within a couple seconds of when he said. I mean, some people can't do that with instrumentation because it takes a sonic boom about a second every 1,000 feet.
Right.
5,000 feet, I'm sorry. So if you're at 30,000 feet, you've got to time it so your sonic boom can travel for 6 seconds before it hits the ground.
That's amazing.
Well, I had Lieutenant Johnson, a lieutenant on the ground with a radio, and I was talking to him and he had a watch. And sure enough, one of the sonic booms he did on that flight with him was a second early. And then the second one was 2 seconds late. So I figure, okay, this man knows what he's doing. And of course, Chuck Yeager, he was a great pilot. He was in his 70s when he and I flew way back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I didn't touch the stick for 2 flights. He hadn't been in an F-15, I think, for 2 years. He alternated between F-15s, F-16, F-15 at that time to start the air show. And he had not flown the F-15 for over 2 years. And it was just like yesterday that he was in the airplane. I was amazed. Very talented pilot.
Like what they say about riding a bike, right? But that's funny because it's I mean, I presume you know the right stuff. I know the right stuff. The movie,
yep.
Book.
Yeah.
And there's that dividing line between the test pilots before the space program, and the test pilots that became the astronauts. And Yeager, of course, is from sort of the old school, and they make a big part of the story about that. But that what you just said about flying by the seat of your pants. I mean, he's a pilot of the old school, I guess you'd say, right?
He was, and it's interesting. The day that I was selected for the astronaut corps, I was with him at what was called the Gathering of Eagles. It was a gathering at Air Command and Staff College in Montgomery, Alabama, Maxwell Air Force Base.
Right.
And every year they have a celebration for these 600 majors that are getting this professional military training for a year. And I was designated as his escort because he was one of the 20 Eagles that was invited to this big event. And so he was signing the lithos, and I was kind of pulling the lithos that day when I was expecting a potential call to join the astronaut corps. And he knew that. Right. And he says, don't say yes, And I said, General Yeager, I said, if I'm going to make a name for myself, some guy broke the sound barrier 50 years ago. I mean, there's new horizons. Hoot Gibson was also there. He's actually the table over, and he knew as well that I was going to get the phone call. And I, of course, wasn't allowed to tell. So I had to wait 24 hours, but they saw it on my face.
Right.
And Chuck said, "You didn't say yes, did you?" I didn't answer.
I'll tell you later. That's
Yeah,
funny.
Chuck Yeager, he was tougher than nails, but he really had a good sense of humor, and he was a great guy.
But that's awesome, because you hear so many. I mean, he maybe more than any pilot going has these sort of legendary stories surrounding him. And I guess it's something surrounding, because everything you do in an aircraft like that is just at the edge of everything man can do, on up through spacecraft, is just comes with legend attached to it. It's just part of what you're doing. So what was that like? Now you got the call. You're in the astronaut corps. What does that feel like?
Well, it was a dream since I was 7 years old. I remember the night that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped on the moon. I was actually in Michigan at my grandparents' house, and Mom and Dad woke us up after our bedtime to watch that milestone event. It was over 50. We're in the 50th year right now. It's 50 years ago. And that set the bug, the spark with me. But I didn't think it ever would happen. It was just a dream. But as I progressed through my career as an engineer and then as a pilot, and then as a test pilot, that dream, it felt like it was getting closer, until at one point you just put your hat in the ring and hope for the best.
And see what happens. Yeah. And so you were, I'll skip ahead. We'll get back to this, but I'll skip ahead, because you actually piloted the Endeavor shuttle in its last flight, right? It was, if I read correctly, it was the second to last shuttle flight ever.
Right. So Endeavor was the last of the space shuttles. It was built from, quote, spare parts after the Challenger accident. I was in all the shuttles during my 15-year career as an astronaut. I spent a lot of time as a pilot preparing, helping to prepare other crews to go into space, whatnot. We'd set up the switches, we'd send them off, we'd pull them out. But Endeavor smelled like a new car. It was the newest of the fleet and my favorite space shuttle, and I was really lucky to fly it twice, on its 21st flight and then on that last 25th flight. Right. I honestly didn't think I was going to get a second flight. Those last few flights were all added at the last minute. So I was very fortunate to get a second shot at it.
Wow. Because there's a whole bunch that goes into that, because you got into the astronaut corps in about 2000 or so?
1998.
98. And then you flew your first mission on a shuttle.
In 2008, a decade later.
Yeah. So, and then, well, I'll get to the next question next, but what is that? Is that like just waiting your turn? How does that go?
Well, there are a lot of factors that play into when you get to fly. I think the longest wait that I've heard of was Story Musgrave. He waited 16 years, I think, before he got to fly. Others, if their timing is right, they might only have to wait 2 or 3 years. But usually astronauts have to wait the better part of 6 to 8, 9, 10 years on average to fly their first flight for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons that our class was delayed is we had an accident in 2003 that delayed the shuttle program for over 2 years. In that process, we analyzed the space shuttle, not just the thermal protection system, which is what was the cause of the Columbia accident, but all of the subsystems of the space shuttle. We looked at them very closely and improved a lot of those systems. So the shuttles we flew post Columbia were actually the safest flights of the program. But also as an astronaut, it takes about 1.5 years, 2 years to go through the basic astronaut candidate course. And then you go into a pool of assignable astronauts. But again, they fill that pipeline with astronauts with lots of different skill sets so they can mix and match and get the right crews for the right missions.
Right. Yeah. And it's in so much of what you do preparing for a launch. And I see this today with the SpaceX launches and the ULA launches and all that, as they count down, they go through a whole checklist of everything. And so much of it is layered around safety. even the unmanned flights, just to make sure this is successful. And I got to think after Columbia, we know my wife met and introduced me to a woman, Ann Miklos, who was worked on the Columbia at one point or another,
Mm-hmm.
and she speaks about it often publicly, and so we hear all about these different layers of things and things that happened after that, and the debris field from the crash and all that, trying to figure out what happened and how it happened and all that. So it's interesting to see, I'm getting to a question here somewhere, but it's just safety being such a huge part of what you're doing in each one of these launches.
Well, that's good insight, Lyle. We would never have gotten off the surface of the Earth if it had to be 100% safe. So every system has some elements of accepted risk, and it's about how much risk are you willing to take to do this important work. But everything in life comes with risk. We have risk here in Houston, just driving down the road. I'm not sure if it's safer to launch in a space shuttle or go down I-45 here in Houston.
Right.
I'm kidding, but really, it is all about accepted risk. Even in this COVID environment, we are willing to accept some risk, or we just button ourselves up in our houses and never go out. So, but we weigh those risks, we mitigate those risks, we try to find better solutions to control the risks. But at the end of the day, if you're going to do something that's interesting or pushing the envelope, it's going to carry some risk. And so as we analyzed the space shuttle during return to flight, we better understood a lot of our systems and recognized that it did carry some risk. And I think that's one of the reasons that we kind of limited the number of shuttle flights in the program, because we recognized that the space shuttle was inherently a little bit too dangerous for a spaceship to put humans on. And that's why we diverted our resources to build these new vehicles that were safer. And SpaceX just launched last month, and it was a safer vehicle than the space shuttle. Yeah. It is a safer vehicle than the space shuttle, and so will Boeing's Starliner. And so we're in this new generation of spaceships that are going to keep us safer.
Yeah, it's I had a track coach growing up who used to talk about when you're training, the idea is if you could make every step just slightly faster than the last one, or make everything you do just slightly better than the last time you did it, you're going to be better off. And it seems to me like that's the kind of approach you take in this sort of a thing. It's like, yeah, we built this thing, it's great, it's working, but we need to keep working at it to make it better so it's safer and more successful. And because like you say, you're doing the good work, you're doing all this, you're gathering all this information, you're doing all this science on the space station, you're doing all this great stuff, but you're not doing it just for its own use. It's
right.
It's there to do something else with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you look at the evolution of airplanes and cars and just about any technology that carries some risk, we're getting better and better. The cars when I was in high school were flat out dangerous compared to the cars we have now, and airplanes are much safer. And so spaceships are on the cutting edge of these aerospace vehicles that we're flying, and we're learning a lot. And we've had some failures, but every innovation cycle, we get better and better. And so this new generation of spaceships we're working on, and the next generation of spaceships that the kids are thinking about, they're going to be better than the ones we have now, and it's exciting.
Exactly right. So your first flight on the space shuttle was also the Endeavor in 2008.
Right.
Now, thinking about that accepted risk, and even though this is sort of later in the space shuttle program, so we've had humans in space quite a bit at this point, but you're still climbing aboard a spaceship on a rocket that's going to get blasted off out of our atmosphere. What does that feel like? And of course, you come from the world of being a test pilot. So maybe your mentality is a little different than the rest of us. But what does that feel like?
Well, first of all, it was very exciting. And I actually liken the feeling that I had before my first combat mission in the Persian Gulf War in Desert Storm to my first space shuttle flight, because there were some similar feelings. One is you're prepared, you're ready,
Right.
you're confident, but there's an unknown on the other side, something that you've not seen yet.
Right.
You think you know what you're going to expect on the flight, but you just don't know. So what you want to do is you want to do the best you can, focus on the task at hand, don't make a silly mistake,
Right.
and execute. And so I was so excited. Like I said, I'd been thinking about being an astronaut since I was 7 years old. And this was the moment that I was actually going to get to go into space. So I was crazy excited. And I did have a healthy respect for there's a little bit of unknowns, a little bit of accepted risk here, but it's well worth it.
Right.
In fact, I'd go to space a third time if I could. My wife would kill me before I launched, but absolutely, I highly recommend an opportunity for anyone to go in space. Now, I know you said you don't like roller coasters, and I'm on the other side of the spectrum. I love jumping out of airplanes, perfectly good airplanes, and I love roller coasters. I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but I just do like exciting adventures. And flying in space was absolutely worth the wait.
Fantastic. One thing you hear astronauts say, and almost, I don't want to say everyone because I haven't talked to everyone, but I hear, in interviews and whatever, is once you leave the atmosphere and you're able to turn back and look back at the Earth, it sort of changes their perspective on humanity, their our place in the universe. What's your experience with that?
Well, it was a spiritual moment when I first looked back at the Earth. And like you said, it does change you. Most every astronaut will talk about the overview effect, or they will talk about how you can't miss that the whole planet is so globally interconnected.
Right.
I mean, during this pandemic, that was a wake-up call for a lot of people around the world that, hey, we're all in this together. I mean, it's not my words, but I say it often to adults and kids alike. Right. Spaceship Earth is nothing more than a 8,000 mile diameter orb that is a closed loop ecosystem that we all share.
Right.
And it's really important for us to get along with each other, to understand each other, and take care of our crewmates.
Right.
And not just be a passenger along for the ride, and also take care of your ship. So all of those issues that resonate in this pandemic are central to this notion that we're all in this together. It's really it's really a spiritual event when you travel around the world every 90 minutes and see all the different countries between 51 North and 51 South. We just live on a beautiful planet.
Yeah, it's sort of.
I wish everybody could see that, because I think we might be a better civilization by just spending some time looking at our wonderful planet.
Fantastic. My wife Heather gave me this question to ask you because she just wonders. She's an acupuncturist, but she's also her background is in biochemistry, so she's got a scientific background as well. And she said, "God, I asked her, what if you could ask an astronaut anything, what would it be?" And she thought about it a little bit, and she said, when you get up there and all of a sudden you're in zero gravity and you're floating around, what does that feel like? I mean, because you train for it, but now you're up there and you're going to be there for 2 weeks or so, floating around. What does that feel like? What is that experience like?
Well, it was magical, Lyle. I mean, completely magical. My first flight, actually, this flight on the photo behind me, this crew behind me, STS-123, we, as soon as main engine cutoff happened, and we were off the external tank, which is the big fuel tank that fuels the 3 main shuttle engines, it was serene, beautiful. It was dark. It was a night launch. And I was laughing. I must have laughed hysterically for a good 10 seconds because it was so crazy to be floating in space. Now we were still strapped into our seats, but you could feel your arms come
Right.
up and everything got lighter and all our checklists and things start floating.
Right.
It was like being in a different world. And my reaction to it is I just started laughing because it was so crazy. And so you really can't train for zero gravity. We have the vomit comet. I took my,
Yeah.
100 odd parabolas in the vomit comet and experienced zero gravity 30 seconds at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're floating for, just a few minutes, I just thought it was unbelievable. And I enjoyed every single moment of the 32 odd days that I spent in space.
Fantastic.
Because floating in space, working was more fun. Play was more fun. Sleeping is amazingly comfortable. I just recommend zero gravity for everyone.
I wish you could sell it down here. It's funny because it's yeah. She said Heather said, you spend your whole life walking around, more or less attached to the earth, and just wondering what it would feel like to be now all of a sudden you're not, and you can't change it. It's not like you can strap magnets to your soles of your feet or something.
Yeah, so we have to adapt when we get up there, and it takes a while. Our bodies are a little bit confused. Our semicircular canals, our vestibular system, goes crazy a little bit, and some people get actively, sick.
Mm-hmm.
But within a few days, most everybody's adapted and accustomed to zero gravity. Once they're up there for 6 months or a year, they come back, and then the readaptation process to gravity actually can be a long process.
Really? Wow. So, you're up there. I guess your missions were about, you said 32 days, so they're about 16 days apiece, give or take.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Do you have any sense of, and looking back at the Earth, do you have any sense of like missing anything, homesickness, anything like that? Or is that?
I think I might have been a little bit homesick, but it was such an adventure that wasn't a central emotion to me. If people are up there for 2, 3, 6 months, I've heard that they get a little bit homesick. But with me, after 14 days, we were undocking on both my flights. Right. I really wanted to stay longer.
Right.
And it was such an adventure to share with the wife and kids on the ground.
Right.
I remember my second flight, the cupola, the big bay window at the bottom of the space station. Right. We had a robotic workstation in there, and I spent a lot of my time doing robotic work on that second flight. And so I spent a lot of time in the cupola. And one of my private meetings with my family, a video teleconference, I was in the cupola with a laptop, sharing the view as we went from Michigan across the Atlantic, across Europe, the Med to Madagascar. That 20 minutes, I shared the view with them on this laptop, then I'd turn it around and they'd share with me what was going on at home. And so technology allows us to be closer to our families in space than what it was like in the Apollo days, for example.
Yeah, I would think. It's just fascinating. It's really fascinating. So your second flight was, like I said, the second to last flight of the shuttle program. And we talked a little bit about, the sort of the inherent risk of the shuttle program. And so you think closing down the shuttle program to look for new, whatever the next generation of technology was good decision, bad decision, could have been better, could have been worse?
Well, okay. So at the time, my personal thought was that we were a little premature in retiring a very capable technology.
Right.
I think we weren't going to be able to keep the space shuttle going, though, and start these other projects because of fiscal constraints. So there was going to have to be a transition from the, mainstay, the space shuttle, to what followed. So I guess my answer to that question is yes to both. I wish that we could have made the gap a little shorter. I mean, it really was a 9-year gap between the last shuttle flight from U.S. soil and the first Dragon, SpaceX Dragon launch. That was a 9-year gap.
Yeah.
I wish we could have figured out how to make that gap shorter. I wish we could have maybe flown a few more sunset flights with the space shuttle, because all the space shuttles that are in the museums around the world, they were the best shuttles they ever had been for those last flights. That last flight of Endeavor, we had no major malfunctions at all, not even any sort of minorish but significant malfunctions. It's just everything worked perfectly.
Fantastic.
And so, yeah, so I was disappointed that we retired the space shuttle, but on the other hand, it had to happen at some point, and you can't do too many parallel programs.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame to have not had the capability of launching crew from U.S. soil for so long.
Right. I think, yeah, if we could have done a little bit of a lead turn on the technology and start working on the next thing and get something, start the competition a little bit sooner, so that we would have a viable launch from the U.S. soil for less than 9 years. That would have been my preference.
Right. Well, I mean, the calendar in the space program is a lot longer than it is in a lot of other industries. So,
yeah, you got to work on it until you get it right.
Right. Exactly right. So, with all of the now sort of privatizing of space industry going on right now, we talked about SpaceX and some of the others, the Boeing vehicle. Maybe there won't be as much of an issue with keeping crew going up from this continent.
So I think so. I think we've entered into a phase where commercial companies are increasingly get involved, not only with human transportation, but all of the sorts of things that we are sending up to space: payloads, satellites, nanosatellites, constellations, and people. And we're planning to go further into space. So as the commercial market builds a business case for space, which is happening, just like it did as we built commerce with the New World centuries ago. Mm-hmm. That evolution is happening. How quickly it happens is a different issue, right? But it's happening in a small way, and I'm sure you're going to ask a little bit about the National Lab, but commerce is entering low Earth orbit on the International Space Station, and there are companies that are making business cases much better than they did 5 or 10 years ago. And so human transportation is another one of those. And there are lots of elements to the business case for human transportation. Astronauts, government astronauts using a commercial vehicle is just one of them. So we're going to see a lot of different technologies coming to bear over the next 50 years. Right.
And you served as CEO of CASIS for several years. CASIS, for anybody listening who doesn't know, that's the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space, which has since sort of rebranded itself as the International Space Station Lab, or something.
National Lab, yep.
Yeah, the National Lab. And so that over time, for so long, it was always at least seen publicly as, that's that NASA thing, that's that government thing, blah, blah, blah. But in actuality, the lab became a place for a lot of businesses to conduct experiments in an environment that they couldn't otherwise access.
Right. So we were busy building the space station as a nation from 1998 until 2011. So, that was the assembly period. But we were living in the house that we were building and trying to do meaningful research and long duration space flight experiments and everything else, starting, just a few years after we started assembly of the space station. So that evolution at first belonged to just NASA until 2005. And then our US government said, hey, we need to have this national lab that focuses on other things besides NASA's objectives. And so again, it was an evolutionary process. CASIS was actually formed in 2011, 2012, I think is when they opened the doors. And CASIS opened in 2011. It was the NASA Authorization Act of 2010. But then half of the space station access was deemed to go to innovation, non-traditional users, commercial companies to make a business case in space. And this progress has continued on till today, where there are more facilities, commercial facilities, and other things going on in the space station that are not solely controlled by NASA, but by this larger community of business people, universities, and others.
Yeah, I mean, I know he's sort of an oddball example, although I guess a good one. Budweiser has been doing experiments on the International Space Station for several years now, looking mainly, I guess, agricultural. How to grow the things they need to make their products better up there, which seems at first kind of like, wow, space beer. But second, with a second look, it's like, no, they're really trying to, push their own technologies in a way they maybe weren't able to here on Earth.
Well, if you think about the laboratories here on the Earth, there are, we have vacuum chambers on the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
We have big, super cool laboratories. We have super hot laboratories, high pressure laboratories. But the thing that we can't do here on the Earth is take gravity out of the equation.
Right.
So the only place that you have continuous near zero gravity conditions, microgravity conditions, is on the International Space Station for more than a few seconds in a parabola, right, for example, or a drop tower. And so physical and biological processes fundamentally can change when the gravity vector is taken out of the equation. So scientists can study things that you just can't study here on the Earth. And we're just scratching the surface now, but there are a lot of technologies and a lot of science that's being done on the International Space Station for that reason.
That's fantastic. And so when you left CASIS, when, 2018?
Right.
And so you have a couple or a handful of really kind of what I think are really interesting projects going on and interesting efforts you're working on. You mentioned Gen Space to me earlier. What are you working on? Where's it going? Because you're kind of in an interesting place that most people aren't. You're kind of in this
freelance.
Okay.
So I've been working on.
I was going to say you have a unique background that not very few people have, and it enables you to talk to people about what they're doing in a way that maybe most of us don't have an opportunity to.
Well, so the guest speaker part of the job, I've kind of worked on that over the last 2.5 years, and I've done some interesting conferences and keynotes, commencements, other things.
Yeah.
And I got involved with the startup community with Gen Space, the global entrepreneurship network. They pulled together a space delegation around the time I left CASIS, so that was a good fit for me to join with them.
Right.
And they're thinking of entrepreneurship in space as a location that everybody's invited around the world globally. It's a really cool thing. I got involved with the Traverse City Space Accelerator up in Traverse City, Michigan, a place that I love. Yep. and hope to retire someday. And also there was a STEM nonprofit that needed my help. So I worked with them for about 1.5 years. Actually, I'm still working with them. I'm on their board of directors now. Right. But again, promoting STEM and creative thinking in Northwest Michigan, right, where there's a great talent pool, and the mission of Newton's Road is to help bring those opportunities to some of the rural areas in Northwest Michigan that wouldn't have seen those opportunities in previous years. And they're doing a great job at it.
That's fantastic, because I've worked with, I actually interviewed a woman I know, Kadira Abdur-Rahim, who runs a foundation in Atlanta. So it's not the rural inaccessibility to technology and high-speed internet and all those problems that you have maybe in Newton's Road. It's more the inner city problems that go along with education. And they have, for example, they're located in an area where the high school graduation rate is something like 43 or 45%. And of their participants, of their people, of their kids in their program, they have a 100% high school graduation rate since 2004. So
that's a great metric. That's awesome.
it's the metric that they use to talk about themselves all the time, and it's fantastic. So, but these are all those things that, and to get involved in education like this, like your Newton's Road effort is that's sort of, to me, that's sort of the thing that makes the link to, what comes next. We're talking about, we're working on a project, and then the next time we do it, it's going to be a little bit better. And the only way you're able to do that is if you have the resources available, the people who understand those things and are willing to challenge those knowns to make it better.
Yep. One of the things we said in Newton's Road is talent is relatively uniformly spread around the country, but opportunities are uneven. And so that's why your friend at the nonprofit in Atlanta and groups in Newton's Road and other underserved communities, having those opportunities and harvesting the talent, enriching those communities with kids that are going to lead us into the next generation, in this rapidly changing digital world. So I'm really excited about these different groups. Also, as I've gotten older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I'm trying to do a little bit more give back. And this is one of the ways as I give back is through these organizations and other workforce and youth development organizations like the Boy Scouts or the Boys and Girls Clubs, for example. So
that's fantastic.
I think it's really important.
And I think it is. And the entrepreneurial side of it, I think, is equally important. And I think tends to open up opportunity more than sort of, this may be unfair, but sort of more than the sort of traditional large corporate kind of environment. Because the entrepreneurial organizations tend to be nimbler and able to do things quicker and make decisions faster, and ideally get the younger, more energetic people into those roles to think about things in different ways.
Yeah, and new space is coming of age, and there's a lot of opportunity and innovation in new space. There are a lot of failures, obviously, but I think failure and innovation are linked to each other, and the quicker you fail and then come up with a new iteration that's
right.
better, that's how we innovate. It's just how fast you learn from that failure.
Yeah.
So I think, and also the diversity of opinion. And diversity doesn't come culturally or politically, but just diversity of thought.
Right.
And just thinking about new ideas and not saying why, but why not? Those sorts of questions. And being willing to take the risk to try new ideas.
Right, and that's true. And I think you talk about failure, and so often I don't think there really is. I don't want to say never any such thing. I never like to say never, but there's rarely such a thing as a complete failure. You do a failure, you realize there's things that were successes in that effort, and there are things that you can learn from testing something to its limit to make it better the next time. So that's all. It's part of the test and rebuild better mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like when I talk to kids about failure, especially at, like, for example, a commencement, it's like, don't be so worried about, failure. Try new things. If it doesn't work, just pivot and regroup.
Right.
And you can change careers. These days, people change careers multiple times in a few years, whereas you don't have to have the same job for 40 years. And you don't have to be doing the same job. You don't need to have the same position in a company for 30 years either. You can go to other lines of work within a company. So I think we're in a much more agile society. So I'll stop there.
That's good. No, it's right. It's good. It's good. So I'll ask you one more thing, because you said you were about 7 when you got bitten by the space bug, if you'll pardon the term. And when I was a kid, you ask a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you say, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a, whatever. And, and my son is 10, and he, we visit the Space Center, and he's overwhelmed by what he sees there. He thinks it's all really, really cool. As someone who has been there, as someone who has done that, what could you say to a young boy or girl who has that in their mind?
Well, a few things. One is there are going to be more and more opportunities to fly in space in decades to come. Just like the evolution of cars, airplanes, the same is going to be true for space. I don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but there are going to be commercial passengers flying in space in decades to come. So there's going to be more possibility. Secondly, I would say the important thing is to do what you love, because if you love it, then you'll do better at it and you'll have a better opportunity to fly in space, because all occupations are going to be represented in space. Right now, I don't know of any attorneys in space yet, although there may have been some attorneys in the new class, but I'm just kidding. I always pick on attorneys. We have lots of doctors, teachers, engineers, scientists, historians, veterinarians that have been astronauts. And so, but the thing they have in common is, the veterinarian that went to space, he was a darn good veterinarian, right. and he was a Renaissance man, is a Renaissance man. And the chemists, they're at top of their game. The pilots, I'd like to think that they're toward the top of their game. Right. And so do what you love and do it very well. And that's probably the key to being an astronaut, and not doing something because you think it's the right intermediate step before you can become an astronaut.
Right.
Don't do something that you think you need to do become an astronaut. Do what you love, and then you can be an astronaut.
Fantastic. Okay, Greg, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. This has been fascinating for me.
Lyle, it's been great talking to you. It's been a number of years since we last talked, and I'm glad that you reached out to me and had this interview.
This was fun. Thanks so much.
You bet.
So that was my conversation with Greg Johnson, Air Force Colonel, pilot, astronaut, and yes, my first guest to have his own Wikipedia listing. After we talked, and I'm still kicking myself a little bit about the fact that the recording was turned off, my son Aiden, age 10, came into my office and asked Greg a handful of questions. It's a pretty cool thing to have a chance to talk to a spaceman when you're 10. The interesting thing was Greg's response. He honestly said he loved talking with a youngster who was so interested in space and exploring the universe beyond what we see every day. It's more than a little inspiring to see how children with an interest can draw joy out of someone who's experienced and achieved so much in his lifetime. And that's why I love these conversations. They really challenge me to think about the world in a way I'm not accustomed to. I'll have to get him back on the show sometime soon and capture his conversation with Aiden. Thanks for listening. If you find yourself enjoying the StoryForge podcast, please give us a review at Apple Podcasts, or we're on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps others find the show and hopefully enjoy it as much as you do. All recording, editing, and executive producing tasks are handled by yours truly, Lyle Smith of Nimblesmith, the content marketing agency. This podcast would not be possible without the sincerely excellent help of our friend and associate producer Anthony Sergi, who produces numerous podcasts, including the truly excellent A Guest in the House about all things hip-hop. The music on the podcast was provided by Jody Nardone and the Jody Nardone Trio, Lights Will Guide You Home album. And if you'd like to send us questions or feedback or suggestions for other subjects or guests, you can reach us through the StoryForge website. That's thestoryforge.com, all words separated by hyphens. Or you can email us at cheers@nimblesmith.com, spelled NYMBLESMITH. Thanks very much.